Daniel stepped off his small ship and onto the metal floor of the outpost. The air here was dry and carried the smell of rust and old machinery. He had come only for fuel and maybe a quick meal before heading out again. The place was quiet too. Quiet for a trading post. A few aliens sat at tables, drinking from tall metal cups. Their eyes followed him as he walked, but no one spoke. He moved to the small market stall near the wall, paying the old alien behind the counter for a few supplies. Daniel was just about to head back to his ship when something strange happened. Out of the shadows near the docking bay, a small figure stepped forward. She was tiny, no taller than his waist. Her skin was pale silver, and her hair was thin and white. Her eyes were the most unusual thing, large, glowing faintly blue, and locked onto his like they could see right into him. She walked slowly toward him. Her small feet making no sound, Daniel stopped, unsure what to do. He had never seen anyone like her before. The girl came closer and reached out, her small hand grabbing his sleeve. Her grip was trembling but firm. She said nothing, but her eyes were filled with something he understood without words: fear and a desperate plea. Daniel crouched down so they were eye to eye. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked softly, knowing she probably couldn't understand him. She didn't answer. She only shook her head slightly and pulled on his arm, as if trying to keep him from leaving. From the corner of his vision, Daniel saw movement. A tall alien in dark armor stepped out from the shadows. His face was hidden by a mask, and he spoke in a harsh, guttural language. The tone was sharp, commanding. The little girl flinched at the sound and hid behind Daniel. Holding on to him even tighter, something felt wrong, very wrong. Daniel's instincts told him this was not a safe place. He glanced around, seeing more figures in the shadows, watching him with narrow eyes. One of them had a weapon slung across his shoulder. He should leave, get on his ship, and fly away before trouble started. That was the smart thing to do. But as he looked down at the girl, her wide, glowing eyes kept him frozen in place. She was scared, alone, and clearly in danger. The armored alien took a step closer, speaking again, louder this time. The girl whimpered, and Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't like bullies, no matter what species they were. He gently pulled the girl forward, putting himself between her and the armored alien. The air in the outpost seemed to grow heavier. A faint clinking sound reached his ears, and he realized it was coming from the girl. He looked down and saw a thin metal shackle around her ankle, connected to a short chain that dragged on the floor. The chain's other end had been broken. Daniel's stomach turned. Whoever she belonged to. She had escaped them, and they wanted her back. The girl tugged on his sleeve again, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to speak. But no sound came. Instead, her eyes told him everything. She was begging him, pleading without a single word. "Don't leave me," Daniel exhaled slowly. He didn't know her story. But he knew what it meant when someone's eyes said more than words ever could, behind the armored alien. Two more figures stepped forward. One of them raised a long, curved blade. The other pulled out a short, glowing baton. They were closing in. Their footsteps echoed on the metal floor. Daniel's mind raced. If he walked away, now, she would be dragged off and probably never seen again. If he stayed, he would be in serious trouble. He weighed his choices in seconds. Then he made his decision without a word. Daniel bent down, slid one arm under the girl's legs and the other around her back, and lifted her off the floor. She gasped softly but didn't resist. Instead, she clung to him, her small hands gripping his jacket as if she feared he might let go. The armored alien shouted something, and the sound of weapons being drawn filled the air. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He turned toward his ship, holding the girl close, her head pressed into his chest. And he could feel her shaking. A low hum echoed through the docking bay as the outpost doors began to seal. Someone had triggered a lockdown. He quickened his pace, but a bright energy blast scorched the wall beside him. He didn't stop, didn't look back, he only ran. The girl's glowing eyes peeked up at him for a moment. In them he saw not just fear, but a fragile hope, a hope she was almost afraid to believe in. Daniel didn't know what kind of trouble he was walking into, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her here, not now, not ever. Daniel moved quickly through the narrow corridors of the outpost, the girl still holding on to him with all her strength. Her head was pressed into his chest, and her trembling fingers gripped his jacket as if she thought he might disappear. He could feel her small heartbeat racing against him. It wasn't just fear, it was desperation. The alarm kept echoing through the station, a sharp, rising tone that made every step feel urgent. Shadows moved in the distance, and Daniel knew it wouldn't be long before the armed aliens caught up. He needed to get back to his ship, start the engines, and get out of this place. But every time he thought of running straight there, something in the girl's eyes came back to him. The way she had looked at him when they first met was more than fear. It was a silent plea for him not to walk away. It was the look of someone who had been let down too many times. Daniel slowed his steps and turned into a quieter hallway. The girl lifted her head slightly, looking around with wide eyes. She made a soft sound, almost like she was warning him. He crouched down, keeping her in his arms. "I don't understand what you're saying," he whispered, "but I'm listening." She pointed down the hallway toward a dim corner. Daniel followed her gesture and saw a small maintenance hatch. He moved over and opened it, revealing a crawl space. It was dark, smelling of oil and dust. The girl tapped his arm and pointed. Inside, Daniel stepped in and carefully crouched with her, closing the hatch behind them. The sound of running footsteps passed by on the other side of the wall. They were close. He held his breath until the noise faded in the small, cramped space. The girl finally looked up at him. Her glowing blue eyes shimmered faintly in the dark. She touched the chain still hanging from her ankle, then touched her own chest, and finally placed her tiny hand over his. It wasn't hard to guess the meaning she was asking for help, truly. Asking him to take her away, Daniel nodded slowly. "All right. I'll help you," he whispered. The girl's eyes softened, and for the first time, a flicker of hope crossed her face. She leaned into him for a moment, as if the promise itself gave her the strength to keep going. A loud metallic crash echoed. Somewhere above them, the girl flinched and grabbed his sleeve tightly. Daniel realized they couldn't hide here for long. He shifted her weight in his arms and opened the hatch again. Peeking out, the hallway seemed empty. He stepped back into it, moving quickly but quietly. They reached a wider section of the station, lit by harsh white lights. This was the main access to the docking bay. Daniel saw his ship at the far end. The path looked clear until a deep voice called out behind him. The same armored alien from before stood there, flanked by two others. One had a rifle, the other held a glowing baton. The armored alien pointed at the girl and barked an order. His voice was sharp and full of authority. The girl whimpered, hiding her face against Daniel's chest. Daniel took a step back, keeping his eyes locked on them. The alien leader took a slow step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a weapon at his belt. Then he spoke again, this time in broken English. "She, not yours. Leave her." Daniel shook his head once, firmly. "Not happening," he said quietly. The alien's eyes narrowed behind his mask, and the two guards started to spread out, trying to flank him. Daniel knew if they got too close, he wouldn't have a chance to reach the ship. He shifted his stance, ready to run. The girl seemed to sense what was coming. She pressed her small hand to his chest, looking up at him with a gaze that said everything. "Please don't let go. Please don't leave me." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about her. The armored alien gave a sharp signal, and the two guards lunged forward. Daniel reacted instantly, turning and sprinting toward the ship. The girl clung to him, her fingers digging into his jacket. Shouts rang out behind them, followed by the sound of boots pounding against the floor. Daniel reached the docking bay controls and slammed his hand on the panel. The doors to his ship began to open. But they were slow, far too slow. Blaster fire lit the air, scorching the walls and floor around him. He ducked and kept running, using the bulk of his ship as cover. They reached the ramp just as another blast hit close enough to make the metal floor shake. Daniel ran inside and hit the emergency close. The ramp began to rise. The girl was breathing fast, her wide eyes fixed on him. The engines roared to life. Daniel could see the armored alien through the cockpit window, still shouting orders. But the ship was already lifting. The girl sat in the co-pilot seat, still watching him closely. Her eyes no longer just full of fear, they now carried something else: trust. The kind of trust that came only when someone proved they would not walk away. Daniel knew then that leaving her had never been an option, and from the way she looked at him, he knew she understood it too. The ship's engines roared louder as Daniel pulled them away from the outpost. The stars outside blurred into streaks as they left the station's orbit. For a moment, there was silence, only the hum of the ship filling the air. The girl sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands resting on her lap. She was still breathing quickly, her glowing eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Daniel glanced at her. "You okay?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward him for a moment before looking away. It was clear she still didn't trust her voice, or maybe she simply didn't speak his language. He turned his attention to the navigation panel, setting a course toward the nearest neutral system. But as he adjusted the coordinates, a red light began flashing on the console. A warning message scrolled across the screen. His ship had been tagged with a tracking signal. Daniel cursed under his breath. The outpost wasn't letting them go so easily. He turned off the autopilot and switched to manual control, hoping to throw off whoever was following. The girl leaned forward, her small fingers brushing the edge of the console. She pointed at the warning light, then at him, as if asking what it meant. "It means we've got company," Daniel said. Glancing back at her, she tilted her head slightly. Not understanding the words, but she seemed to understand the tone. Her grip on the armrest tightened. Moments later, the radar lit up. 2 blips appeared behind them, moving fast. Daniel's gut tightened. He pushed the throttle forward. The ship shuddered as it sped up, but the blips followed, closing the distance. The girl turned her gaze toward him, her eyes locking onto his. That same silent plea from before was there again. But now it was mixed with something else: fear for him, not just herself. Daniel gritted his teeth. "Hold on," he said, pulling the ship into a sudden dive. The stars twisted around them. The blips shifted but didn't fall behind. Whoever was chasing them was skilled. The girl suddenly pointed to the side, toward the black shape of an asteroid field. Daniel hesitated. Flying through it was dangerous. One wrong move and the ship could be torn apart. But staying in open space was worse. He angled the ship toward the asteroids. The chasing blips followed. The first massive rock loomed ahead. Daniel twisted the controls, slipping between 2 spinning chunks of stone. The ship's hull groaned as they scraped past. The girl's eyes stayed on him, wide but steady. She wasn't screaming or panicking. She was watching, trusting him completely. That trust hit him harder than he expected. He couldn't fail her. Not now. The asteroids spun in all directions, some as small as fists, others the size of small moons. Daniel weaved the ship through the narrow gaps, forcing their pursuers to either match his path or crash. One of the blips vanished from the radar in a sudden burst of static. The other kept following. The girl shifted in her seat. Glancing between the radar and the view outside, she leaned forward, her hand hovering over the console. Then she pressed a button Daniel hadn't touched. A small hatch on the underside of the ship opened, releasing a cloud of reflective chaff. Daniel blinked in surprise. "You know ships?" he asked. She didn't answer, but there was a tiny smile at the corner of her lips. The chaff scattered through the asteroid field, bouncing signals in all directions. The remaining blip hesitated, then broke off. The radar went clear. Daniel exhaled slowly, easing the ship out of the asteroid belt. When the stars returned to normal, Daniel looked over at her again. "You just saved us," he said. The girl tilted her head, not understanding the words, but recognizing his tone. Her smile grew just a little. Daniel knew then that she wasn't just some helpless child. She had survived whatever nightmare had put her in chains. She knew things, useful things, and she had just proven she could help him too. Still, his relief didn't last long. The tracking signal might be gone, but the danger wasn't over. Whoever had sent those ships would try again, and they would keep coming until they had her back. The girl leaned back in her seat. Finally letting out a small sigh, she looked out at the stars, then at him. For a moment, her gaze softened, almost like she was silently telling him, "Thank you." Daniel returned his focus to the controls. They needed somewhere safe to hide. Somewhere her captors wouldn't dare follow. But deep down, he already knew there was no such place in this part of space. If he kept her with him, the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. She must have felt the tension in the air, because she reached out and lightly touched his hand on the controls. Her eyes met his, steady and unblinking. They didn't need words in that look. She was saying something loud and clear. "Don't leave me," and Daniel knew he wouldn't. Not for anything. Not for anyone. The stars ahead stretched endlessly. But Daniel knew they weren't alone. He could feel it's a kind of pressure in the air that told him someone was out there, watching, waiting. The girl sat quietly in the co-pilot's seat, but her glowing eyes kept darting toward the radar as if she could sense it too. Daniel kept his hands steady on the controls. His ship wasn't the fastest, but it was tough and could take a hit. Still, if the enemy sent more than 2 ships, he knew they would be in serious trouble. He glanced at the girl. She didn't speak, but her small fingers tapped nervously against the armrest. A sudden beep broke the silence. The radar lit up with 3 blips this time, coming in fast from behind. Daniel cursed under his breath. Whoever was after her was done playing games. They were bringing in a real hunting squad now. The girl's eyes widened. She pointed at the blips, then at him. Her lips moved, forming words in her own language. The tone was urgent. Daniel didn't understand, but the meaning was clear there here. He switched the ship into combat mode. The hum of the engines deepened, and the lights in the cockpit dimmed outside. The blackness of space seemed to close in as the 3 enemy ships appeared in the distance. Sleek and sharp like predators, Daniel pulled the ship into a sharp turn. The girl gripped her seat. Her eyes locked on the chasing vessels. They were fast, too fast. Already they were closing the gap. The first ship fired, and a bright beam of energy cut through the dark, missing them by only a few meters. Daniel dove low toward a drifting field of old cargo containers. Some were cracked open, spilling frozen debris into space. He weaved between them, using the wreckage as cover. The enemy ships followed, their weapons lighting up the darkness. With every shot, one blast hit a container to their left, sending it spinning into their path. Daniel swerved hard, barely missing it. The girl let out a small gasp, but kept her focus. Her glowing eyes scanned the controls as if searching for something. Then she reached over and pressed a button Daniel rarely used. A hidden turret on the underside of the ship whirred to life. Its sensors locked onto the nearest enemy ship. The girl glanced at him, and Daniel nodded. Giving her the go-ahead, the turret fired, sending a burst of plasma into the black. The shot hit one of the pursuing ships directly. Its shields flared, and it spun away, smoking, disappearing into the wreckage field. The girl looked back at him with the smallest hint of a smile, but there was no time to celebrate. The other two ships had split apart, flanking him from both sides. Daniel pulled hard on the controls, dipping under one ship and climbing toward the other. The girl watched his movements closely, her small hands tightening on the seat straps. The first enemy ship moved in close, too close, trying to force him into a collision. Daniel rolled the ship to one side. Skimming so close, he could see the alien pilot inside. The girl leaned forward, eyes sharp. She pressed another button. Releasing a sudden flare of light from the ship's rear, the enemy ship veered away. Blinded, Daniel took the chance to blast forward, breaking free of their trap. But the second enemy ship wasn't giving up. It came at them from behind, guns blazing. The ship shook under the impact as one of the shots grazed their hull. Warning lights flashed across the console. The girl glanced at him, concern in her eyes. Daniel gave her a quick nod. "We're fine," he said, even though they weren't. She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand the intent. He spotted a narrow rift in a nearby asteroid, barely wide enough for his ship. Without hesitation, he angled toward it. The girl's eyes went wide, realizing what he was about to do. She grabbed the seat straps, holding on tight. The ship plunged into the rift. Jagged rock walls rushing past on both sides. Sparks danced across the hull where they scraped too close. The enemy ship tried to follow, but the space was too tight. It clipped a rock, spun, and disappeared in a burst of light. Silence filled the cockpit again. Daniel slowed the ship as they emerged on the other side of the asteroid. The radar was clear. For now, they were safe. The girl slowly relaxed her grip on the straps. Her breathing calmed, and she looked at him. There was no fear in her eyes. Now, only something deeper trust. Daniel leaned back in his seat, catching his breath. He glanced at her and realized something. She wasn't just holding on to him because she needed a ride. She was holding on to him because, for the first time, in who knows how long, someone had fought for her. The hum of the ship filled the quiet. But Daniel knew it wouldn't last. They had escaped the chase. But whoever was after her would send more. And next time, they might not be so lucky. The girl seemed to know that. Her eyes stayed on him, steady and unblinking. She didn't need to say it out loud. He could read it clearly. "Don't leave me." And Daniel silently promised her he wouldn't, no matter what was coming. The asteroid field was far behind them now. The stars ahead were calm and still. But Daniel knew it was only an illusion. Somewhere out there, someone was still hunting them. He kept one hand on the controls, ready to react. The girl sat quietly in the co-pilot seat. Her legs were tucked under her, and her eyes were fixed on the glowing console. Every so often, she would glance at him, not saying anything, just watching. Daniel could feel the weight of her gaze. It wasn't the look of someone curious. It was the look of someone trying to understand. Finally, he broke the silence. "Who are you?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, not understanding the words. He tried again, slower. "Name." "What's your name?" She hesitated, then placed her small hand on her chest. She made a soft sound, a single word in her language. It was gentle, almost musical. Daniel repeated it the best he could. She gave a faint smile, as if to say he got. "Close enough?" He nodded. "All right. I'll remember that." For a moment, there was peace in the cockpit, but Daniel's mind wasn't resting. He still didn't know why they wanted her so badly. She was small, young, hardly a threat, unless there was something more to her, something they weren't telling him. He adjusted the navigation and scanned for a safe place to land. A small trade station showed up on the map. It wasn't much, but it was outside the normal patrol zones. Maybe they could hide there for a while. The girl noticed the change in course. Her glowing eyes flicked from the stars to him. She leaned forward, pointing at the map, then shaking her head quickly. Her lips moved in a rapid string of words Daniel couldn't understand, but her tone was sharp, urgent. He slowed the ship and looked at her closely. "What's there?" he asked. She just kept shaking her head, her expression tense. He realized she wasn't afraid of the station because of him. She was afraid because she already knew who controlled it. Daniel changed the course again, bypassing the station entirely. The girl's shoulders relaxed a little. She looked at him with a new expression, as if testing whether she could truly trust him. They drifted in silence for a while. The hum of the engines filled the space. Then the girl did something unexpected. She reached forward and lightly touched the scar on his right hand. It was an old burn mark from a job gone wrong years ago. He glanced at her in surprise. Her eyes met his. Steady and deep, she tapped the scar gently, then tapped her own chest, and finally touched the broken chain still hanging from her ankle. The meaning clicked in his head. She was telling him she knew what pain was. She was telling him they weren't so different. Daniel felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about making sure she never had to be chained again. He opened the small toolkit under the console and pulled out a cutting tool. She watched with wide eyes as he knelt beside her. "Let's get this off you," he said. She lifted her leg hesitantly. The metal cuff was tight, biting into her skin. The cutting tool hissed as he worked on the lock. Sparks danced in the air. The girl stayed very still, her gaze never leaving his face. After a few minutes, the lock gave way. The cuff fell to the floor with a dull clang. She stared at her ankle, touching the freed skin like she couldn't believe it. Then her eyes lifted to his again. There was something new there, no gratitude so strong it almost hurt to look at. For the first time since he had met her, she smiled fully. It wasn't just a small curve of the lips. It was real, warm, and alive. Daniel smiled back without even meaning to, but the moment didn't last. A soft alarm beeped on the console. Another tracking signal was active. Daniel's stomach tightened. He glanced at the girl. "They found us again." Her smile faded, replaced by determination. She moved closer to the console. Pointing at a series of buttons, Daniel realized she wanted to help. He nodded, letting her take the co-pilot controls. Her small hands moved quickly, activating countermeasures he hadn't even thought to use. The signal flickered, then went dead. She looked at him, almost proud. Daniel let out a breath. "You're full of surprises," he said. Her eyes softened again. That look returned, the one that spoke more than any words could. It was a mix of trust, hope, and something else, something deeper. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The truth was in her eyes. She didn't just want safety, she wanted him to stay, to keep fighting for her, and without even thinking about it, he knew he would. The ship drifted through the quiet edge of space, but Daniel's instincts told him the silence wouldn't last. The girl sat in the co-pilot seat, watching the stars, but her eyes kept flicking toward the radar as if she could sense trouble before it came. Daniel was still thinking about the second tracking signal they had just destroyed. If there was a second one, there could be more. It meant they weren't just being followed, they were being hunted with precision. Whoever was after her wasn't going to stop until they had her back in chains. The console beeped softly, and a warning flashed across the screen. Daniel leaned forward, his jaw tightened. A large vessel was emerging from hyperspace ahead of them. It wasn't just a patrol ship, it was a carrier, the kind of ship designed to capture, not destroy. The girl's hands gripped the armrests. Her eyes widened as she looked at the vessel. She whispered something in her language, a word she repeated twice. Daniel didn't understand it, but her tone made the meaning clear: danger. The carrier moved to block their path, its bulk cast a shadow even in the endless dark of space. A voice came through the comm system, low and commanding. Speaking in the alien language Daniel had heard before, he didn't need a translator to know they were telling him to surrender. Daniel muted the comm. "Not a chance," he muttered. The girl looked at him, her expression tense but trusting. The carrier launched small interceptor craft, fast and agile. They spread out, surrounding his ship. The radar lit up like a storm. Daniel switched to full manual control, weaving through the gaps, but more ships were closing in. A blast rocked the ship from the side. Alarms blared. The girl was thrown against her seat straps. Daniel checked the damage. Nothing fatal yet, but they couldn't take many more hits. The enemy ships fired again, aiming not to destroy, but to disable. They wanted the ship intact. Daniel knew he couldn't outrun a carrier in open space. He needed another plan. He scanned the map and spotted a nearby moon. Its surface was jagged, with deep canyons that could hide them if they made it. He angled the ship toward the moon. The girl saw the shift in course and glanced at him. She didn't need to ask. She knew he was going to try something risky. The enemy ships followed, closing the distance. Energy blasts lit the dark as Daniel dove toward the moon's surface. The craters grew larger and sharper in the viewport. The ship shook as they hit the thin atmosphere. He pulled them into a narrow canyon, the walls rising high on both sides. The enemy craft followed, their engines roaring. Daniel pushed the ship deeper into the winding path. Each turn sharper than the last. The girl held onto the console, her eyes locked ahead. They reached a dead end, a sheer rock wall. Daniel's hands moved fast over the controls, activating the ship's camouflage plating. The ship blended into the canyon wall. The engines powered down. Silence fell. The enemy ships roared past overhead, scanning the canyon, but missing them. Daniel didn't breathe until the radar cleared. The girl looked at him, relief in her eyes, but it didn't last. The carrier was still out there, and they couldn't hide forever. Daniel stood and moved to the back of the cockpit, opening a storage compartment. Inside was an old exosuit, heavy armor with powered limbs designed for ground combat. He checked the battery pack and strapped it on. The girl watched silently, her gaze curious but serious. He knelt in front of her. "If they board us, you stay behind me, understand?" She didn't understand the words, but she nodded slowly. Moments later, the cum crackled again, this time in broken English. "Human. Give her and live." Daniel's grip tightened on the suit's gauntlet. He walked back to the console and hit the transmit button. "Not happening," he said, his voice cold. The carrier moved in closer. The radar showed boarding craft launching. They were coming to take her by force. Daniel grabbed his rifle from the wall mount. The girl stood, moving toward him. She placed her small hand on his arm. Her eyes searched his face, as if making sure he truly meant to protect her. He gave her a single nod. The ship shook as the boarding clamps locked on. The sound of metal cutting into metal echoed through the hull. Daniel stepped into the corridor, the exosuit servos humming with each movement. The girl followed close behind, her steps silent. The first breach came with a shower of sparks. Alien soldiers poured through, their armor black and their weapons glowing. Daniel fired, the recoil kicking against his shoulder. The narrow corridor lit up with flashes of light. The girl stayed back, but her eyes never left him. Each time an alien fell, she seemed to breathe a little easier. More soldiers came, forcing Daniel to fall back toward the cargo hold. He moved with precision, each shot buying them more time. Finally, the last soldier hit the ground. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of scorched metal. Daniel turned to the girl. "We're leaving," he said. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She nodded, and for the first time since he had met her, there was no fear in her eyes, only determination. They ran back to the cockpit. Daniel hit the controls, breaking the docking clamps. The ship roared to life and shot away from the moon's surface. The carrier tried to follow, but Daniel had one last trick. He dropped a cluster of mines into the canyon. The blast lit up the moon's surface, forcing the carrier to pull back. As the stars opened up before them again, Daniel glanced at the girl. She was still watching him. Her eyes said it all. He had kept his word. The carrier was gone from the radar. But Daniel didn't relax. He knew this wasn't over. The people chasing them were patient hunters. They would wait, they would search, and they would strike again. But for now, they had a small window of freedom. The girl sat in the co-pilot's seat. Her knees pulled close to her chest. She was staring out at the endless black of space, her glowing eyes reflecting the starlight. Daniel glanced at her, wondering what she was thinking, wondering if she even believed they were safe. He adjusted the ship's course toward a quiet sector, far from trade routes and patrol paths. It wasn't on any chart, just a cluster of drifting moons and abandoned mining stations. If they were lucky, it would give them a place to rest. The girl turned her gaze from the stars to him. Her eyes didn't have the same fear they had when he first met her. They were softer now, warmer, but still holding that deep, unspoken, plead, "Not leave me." Daniel gave her a small nod, as if answering a question she hadn't asked. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand the meaning. Her shoulders relaxed, just a little. Hours passed in silence. The hum of the ship was the only sound. Daniel was used to traveling alone, but somehow the quiet felt different with her there. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt connected, like the space between them was alive with something unspoken. Eventually, he brought the ship to a slow stop inside the shadow of a massive, broken moon. Its cracked surface glowed faintly from old mining fires deep underground. They were hidden here, at least for the night. He unstrapped from the pilot's seat and went to the small storage locker. Pulling out a sealed pack of food rations, he offered it to her. She looked at it for a moment, then at him. Her hands took it slowly, and she unwrapped it with careful fingers. When she tasted it, her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't eaten anything decent in a long time. She ate slowly, almost shyly, but didn't stop until the pack was empty. Daniel noticed the way she kept glancing at him between bites, like she still couldn't believe he was letting her eat without taking something from her in return. After she finished, she set the wrapper aside and sat quietly again. Daniel thought she might fall asleep, but instead, she stood and walked over to him. She reached up, gently touching his shoulder. Then she pointed to herself, then to him, then pressed her hand over her heart. He didn't know her language, but he didn't need to. She was telling him she trusted him. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He had been in battles, faced down enemies twice his size, but nothing had ever hit him like the look in her eyes. It was a kind of trust that came only when someone had nothing left to lose. "All right," he said softly. "We're in this together." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand, then gave a small smile. Later, as the ship drifted in the moon's shadow, Daniel ran a full systems check. He had to be sure they were ready to move at any second. The girl curled up in the co-pilot's seat, her small frame almost lost in it. Her glowing eyes stayed on him until they finally closed. For a while, he just sat there, watching her sleep. Her breathing was soft and even, but her hands still rested against the straps like she expected to wake up in chains again. Daniel's jaw tightened. He swore to himself that would never happen. While he was alive, suddenly, the radar gave a faint blip. Daniel leaned forward. But it wasn't another ship. It was just a drifting piece of debris moving past the moon. He let out a slow breath. The danger might have been gone for now, but it would return. And when it did, he needed to be ready. He turned his gaze back to the girl. In just a short time, she had gone from a stranger to someone he knew he couldn't walk away from. She had been nothing but a silent plea when they met. But now she was something more, a reason. Daniel reached over and pulled a blanket from the side compartment. He placed it gently over her. She shifted slightly in her sleep. Curling deeper into the seat, the stars outside kept shining, cold and distant. But inside the small ship, there was warmth now. Daniel leaned back in the pilot's seat, keeping one eye on the radar and the other on her. Whatever came next, more hunters, more danger, more running. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was keeping a promise, the kind you never break. And somewhere deep in her dreams, maybe she knew it too, because even in sleep, she didn't let go.